Calgary-Greenway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past week saw the gathering of many of Alberta's municipal officials for the meeting of the AAMDC. The Deputy Premier was told that the carbon tax and the early phase-out of coal would be devastating for the community of Stadler County. When a concerned citizen asked for the assistance from the provincial government in paying the ruinous cost of the carbon tax, the Deputy Premier laughed. Shame to the Deputy Premier. Do you find it amusing that your government's policies are threatening the very existence of some of our rural communities?
Shame on you.
Honourable Deputy Premier, Minister of Environment and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we have reached out to many of the communities that the honourable member is talking about, from Hannah to Grand Cache, have been reached out to by the Minister for Economic Development, who is, of course, leading this transition conversation. You know, when we took over, there are 12 plants that were slated for decommissioning under the previous federal government's coal regulations, regulations that, of course, the Leader of the Official Opposition voted for, Mr. Speaker. And we discovered to our horror, Mr. Speaker, that the previous government had no plan to engage the communities that were affected by those regulations.
Thank you, Madam Minister. First supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that this government insists that they are listening to our rural communities, and given that only 8 out of 18 ministers, that is less than half, actually bother to show up to the AAMDC.
Wow.
Let me try it again.
Wow.
To the Deputy Premier again. If you are being honest about your government's commitment to actually listen to the valuable feedback from the communities hit hardest by your policy, why is it that so many ministers refuse to actually show up and be accountable?
Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. The time that we have those conferences periodically throughout the year, twice a year, during that very same time, we had the Minister of Economic Development with 80 Alberta-based companies over in Asia trying to sell Alberta businesses and get good access for our products, Mr. Speaker. We also had ministers standing up and leading on climate change, speaking at international environmental conferences. We're going to do work on behalf of all Albertans, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be one of the cabinet ministers who was there to answer questions and look forward to having more opportunities to engage with rural communities at AAMDC or otherwise, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Second supplemental.
Sorry would have been nice, given that our municipal leaders are clearly losing faith in this government's willingness to listen to their concerns, as evidenced by the audible booing that accompanied the Deputy Premier's defending their ill-convinced carbon tax, and given that the province should be trying to maintain a respectful relationship with the municipalities. Again to the Deputy Premier, will you try to get this government back to a place where your municipal officials can trust and believe when you say you're committed to listening to and stop this punitive carbon tax?
Just apologize.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And well, first of all, I will not, Mr. Speaker. I will not be booed, Mr. Speaker, in the exercise of my work.
I think the booing phenomenon is not acceptable in this House, and I expect all members to listen to what I'm saying with that respect. Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, of course, was Constituency Week. I was scheduled to be out of the country, and I am aware that many rural municipalities have questions, Mr. Speaker, about both the coal-fired phase-out and our climate leadership plan, Mr. Speaker. So what I did is I reached out to the AAMDC, and we'll be scheduling a telephone town hall, Mr. Speaker, so that I can take those questions, Mr. Speaker, and we can have a fulsome discussion about the coal-fired phase-out and the supports that will be coming from this government, about the $2 billion worth of municipal infrastructure.